Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started. This story is about a girl whose name is Isuen. She was a kindergarten teacher. However, after losing consciousness in a bus flood, she woke up in a fantasy novel that she had read while still alive. And that novel was called Cinderella Doesn't Wear Crystal Slippers. It was, without a trailer, #1 among fantasy novels of the time. This is a story about the life of the main character who had the ability to see spirits at the Pink Magic Academy. In addition to the Crown Prince being in a relationship with the main character, the villain, Ariel, was also there. Another important character was the youngest commander, Crendon, as well as the cursed second prince, Sirius. While the Crown Prince and the protagonist ran towards their happy ending, an extreme story unfolds during which all the minor characters die, and the girl ends up reincarnated as Cernia Ani. As soon as she opened her eyes, she immediately thought that she had become the main character in this novel. But when she looked around and saw her appearance, she changed her opinion. The girl was a minor character, namely the daughter of a former duke, appearing briefly in individual chapters. The girl was only 7 years old at the time, and she was sitting with her friends who were arguing all the time. One red-haired girl asked that she read her a fairy tale about love, but another boy objected, telling her to read him a heroic romance. Because of this, the children began to fight, snatching from each other the book that Cernia was supposed to read. In fact, after the former Duke and Duchess died in an accident, the current Duke, who was his father's younger brother, inherited the title Duke of Artetan, and eventually took her in when she became an orphan. And these two were her cousins, Ariel and Ariel. The girl was only 5 years old, just like the boy. The two continued to argue. Then they turned to Cernia and asked what she even thought about it. The girl thought at this moment that these two definitely looked like angels, but in the future, they would become the greatest villains in this novel. The girl was silent for a while, then she said that she would be very happy just to be around them. When they heard this, they were overjoyed. They ran up to their little sister and hugged her and said it was wonderful. Cernia was pleased to be hugged, so she didn't object. But in truth, her fate was not as good as she might have thought. She would be the character that would provide the two with the excuse to get on the path of evil. The real Cernia, however, was very cruel. She kept saying she never loved them, and out of jealousy of the twins she even killed their nanny. The girl claimed that there was no one in this whole world who could truly love them, and they would never experience those feelings. The children were very surprised at that moment, but when Cernia expressed all her curses and thoughts, she simply killed herself in front of them. And now the girl realizes that she definitely doesn't want to live according to the original story, at least because she doesn't want to die, because in her previous life, she already died. Suddenly Ariel came to her and asked her to read her a fairy tale about love. When she picked up the book, she was very surprised. It said that this novel was for all adults, which meant that there were some pretty serious scenes that children shouldn't know about yet. So Cernia suggested that she read the book when she was a little older. Ariel was sad when she heard this, because she wanted to hear the story so much. But the girl smiled back at her and told her that it would happen soon enough, so she shouldn't worry. The cousin calmed down and said that so be it, she would agree since the girl said so. Cernia immediately thanked her for her understanding. But then Ariel asked if she could kiss her on the cheek in return. Ariel looked at her in surprise, not understanding how this could be related. But then suddenly Ariel took her hand and told her that it wasn't fair, because he should be kissed too in that case. She was a little angry at this point, because she had promised herself that she wouldn't spoil them too much. But she couldn't just leave these cuties out, could she? So leaning close to the children, she whispered that since it was so, it would be their secret. The children were immediately delighted and kissed her on the cheek and said that of course they would keep the secret. Cernia immediately began to smile. She knew better than anyone that children needed to be given love, and since she was in this place, there was no way she was going to let these lovely people become villains. She is also going to preserve her innocent youthful life in this way. And so, while they were hugging and having fun, then suddenly someone entered their room. It was Nerestus Radentine, the current Duke of the Empire, and he looked indignantly at the children and said that even outside the door you could hear them making noise. All three of them immediately felt uncomfortable, and that atmosphere of fun and youthfulness immediately evaporated. The man, sighing heavily, turned around and started to walk away, telling them to behave according to their family's level next time. When the door slammed shut, Cernia immediately looked at the children and, seeing how upset they were, asked if everything was okay. She also apologized to them, for they had been scolded because of her. Ariel blushed and then asked in a sad voice if her father didn't love them that much. The girl, smiling, replied that not at all. The Duke could not help but love them, for they were his beautiful children. But Ariel, who was also angry because their father scolded them over nothing, said that he definitely didn't love them. He just didn't care. When Ariel heard these words, she began to cry. It was so hard for her because she was still very young. The girl, when she saw this, immediately wanted to comfort her. But Ariel, wiping away her tears, said she was all right and could ignore her. Cernia wasn't going to leave it like that, so she took the two children's hands and said that in that case, she would go and talk to the Duke about the situation. It wasn't much consolation to the twins, of course. Ariel had calmed down a little, but her eyes still showed how upset she was. And Ariel wondered why she had decided to do this. But the girl, smiling, said it was all because she loved them and wanted to look after their welfare. In fact, in addition to her love, the twins also needed love from their parents to keep them off the bloody path so that she could live her life in peace. With confident steps, Cernia approached the room where, as always, the Duke sat at his various papers. Outside stood the butler, who always made sure no one disturbed him, and as soon as the girl came closer to him, he wondered in surprise if she had really come to see the Duke. Cernia was all shaking with fear. She didn't understand how she should be, for straight up she couldn't stand still because of all her nerves. The butler, hearing no answer, once more interrogated the young lady for what purpose she had come to him. Cernia immediately woke up and turned to Dane and asked if she could see the Duke right away, for she needed to speak to him as soon as possible. The man, after some time of deliberation, still agreed to it, and then the girl opened the door to the study. In fact, in all the time she had lived in this house, this was the first time she had come to meet the Duke. Dane immediately closed the doors behind her so that no one would interrupt them. Cernia, for her part, was still very worried for a while, not knowing what would happen if he just didn't want to see her. But then the butler followed her and told the young lady that he would take her straight to the study. Then the two of them went through another door and went straight to the Duke's office. He, in turn, was sitting at his desk and signing some papers. In fact, when the girl heard the sound of pen scribbling on paper, she felt a little calmer. The color of hair and eyes, which is absolutely inherent in the Ardentine family, was just as present in the Duke. The character who was portrayed with a cold temperament and was the father of the twins, the Duke sat and did not take his eyes off his business for a while. But then suddenly, seeing the girl in front of him, he looked at her and said that he had been informed that she wanted to talk to him. Cernia was still a little worried and said that it was absolutely true. She was sweating all over and even blushing because of her intense nerves. But she tried to reassure herself, saying it was all right. She was 7 years old now, and she thought she could say something easy, and surely he wouldn't chase a little kid out into the street for nothing. So, plucking up her courage, she turned to the Duke and said that Ariel and Ariel were still 5 years old after all, an age at which children needed more parental love. And that's why she really asks that he be with the kids at least once in a while, even though he's such a busy man. Duke, for his part, when he heard this, was very much surprised, and asked how she thought he should spend his time with them. Cernia was immediately pleased, for interest is already the first step to success, so she said that they could have a tea party together. After all, if she simply asked to love them, the Duke would certainly not understand. It would be much better to increase their time together. The man was silent for a while, and just looked sternly at the girl. She was beginning to worry again, because he hadn't even said a word. Cernia didn't realize what she had said wrong, and assumed he would just ignore her and even punish her afterward. But then suddenly the man wondered in surprise if the twins had really asked her to do this. Did they really want to be loved? Cernia was a little surprised to hear this, but said not at all. It was entirely her idea. Then the Duke, with a sigh, said that they would be given the Ardentine family in the future, and they should never be pampered with such things. The girl agreed with him and said that he was quite right. Family members should be strong. However, the mere desire that the offspring of the family grow strong should not cause them to break when the whip is applied alone. The man, hearing this, thought for a moment. In fact, Cernia thought that if children had such a childhood, they would indeed become villains, just as the original story said they would. All because they will simply be exhausted and will see no point in doing good, because they have not been treated properly. The Duke was silent for a while, and then with a heavy sigh said that she was saying the same thing as Rowan. Cernia, when she heard this name, was very surprised. She knew very well who it was, for it was the name of Cernia's deceased mother. And if her mom said exactly the same thing, then she only has a little bit to nudge him into the right decision. After a little thought, the girl said that words and tenderness alone would not do. In this case, it is necessary to organize a tea party at least once a month. Check the development of children, praise them, and guide them on the right path. Gemini will thus have the opportunity to grow and mold their personalities rather quickly in order to properly manage the empire in the future. The Duke, on hearing this, smiled at once, and then inquired what benefit he would get out of it if he agreed to such a thing. Cernia, when she heard this, was very surprised and didn't understand what benefit he still wanted. So she said that Gemini would grow well, and perhaps become what he saw them as. Then the man inquired, "Does she really care?" The girl asked in surprise what he even meant. Well, the Duke didn't bother to explain anything. He said, after some thought, that he would agree to such a proposal, and added that he would tell the dean about it, so that he could adjust the schedule. Cernia, when she heard about it, was immediately very happy. She thanked him for it and told him that he would definitely not regret his choice. The girl then turned around and began to run away, saying that in that case, she would be on her way. When the Duke was alone, and he began to analyze the conversation that had taken place, and remembering how worried Cernia had been about suggesting it to him, he smiled and thought about how she was incredibly Rowan-like after all. Some time had passed since that moment, and Cernia had already returned to the room where her cousin and sister were sitting. She happily ran in there and said that the Duke had agreed, but quickly stopped when she saw what was going on in there. Ariel beat his sister Ariel, and talked about how it was all her fault. Weed cried. The girl in turn pinched him on different parts of his body, and said that it was actually his fault. Cernia was very surprised at this behavior. Then she cried out, asking, "Why are they fighting again? After all, they are brother and sister." The children immediately turned in her direction, and they felt incredibly embarrassed. They were ready to cry. Well, then ran up to the girl and started hugging her hard, saying how they were guilty and apologizing, and also Ariel asked that she not go anywhere away from them. Cernia was madly surprised when she heard this. But the children were gaining on her so much that they all even fell to the ground. Then she wondered what they even meant. Ariel said it's no big deal if their father really doesn't love them. She has enough of her love and care. She doesn't need more. Cernia smiled and hugged the children again, asking where she would ever leave them, since she would be with them forever. Then she wondered, were they really afraid that the Duke would kick her out because of what had happened? The twins put their heads down and said that this was indeed true. They felt that her father would scold her severely and not allow her to be together anymore. But Cernia said it's really all right. Nothing much happened. The Duke isn't as heartless as they think he is. They immediately looked at her in surprise, and the girl said that even though he had this small, very thin streak in him, he still decided to spend time with them all once a month. When the twins heard this, they were very surprised. They couldn't believe it was really true. Ariel was even very angry for some reason, and Ariel looked at him in surprise, not knowing how she should even react. Cernia decided to diffuse this awkward situation and, laughing, asked what they would be playing tomorrow. The kids had made up their minds after all. Then she took the two of them and started upstairs to the playroom. She thought about what she would enter step by step, and thus she can escape the death that was foreshadowed in the novel. In fact, when the girl died, some mysterious man appeared in front of her. He had a huge staff in his hands, with a watch visible on it. And this unknown man was just about the last person she saw being in Suin. She has an incredible amount of questions, but her voice was gone at that moment and she couldn't ask anything. At the end, while she wasn't yet transported to the new world of the novel, she did manage to ask who the man was. But he didn't answer her anything, and used his magic to transport her to another world. And now, since that moment has passed quite a large amount of time, the girl from time to time, when she falls asleep, see this terrible dream, but still cannot talk and find out the truth. In fact, Cernia, as a character, should have died as early as 10 years old after hurting her brother and sister. However, this did not happen. Even now, at the age of 16, she is still alive. During this time, the relationship between the twins and the Duke was mended. The man's family changed course to a good direction for all of them. Cernia was well aware that she didn't have much time left, for the Crown Prince's birthday banquet would be held in a year's time. And after a few years, the full plot of the novel would finally begin. At that moment, the girl went to the nightstand in her room and pulled out a small, brightly colored book. In fact, as soon as she was old enough to be able to write and read, the first thing she did was write down the outline of this novel in one place. She double-checked what she had written several times to make sure she wasn't mistaken, because as time went on, she began to forget many of the details. And now, after all this time, Cernia decided to reread it again. It said that Cinderella does not wear crystal slippers. It is a twisted novel, with 2 main characters, one of them a villain, and 3 secondary characters. At a banquet that was dedicated to the Crown Prince's 15th birthday, Ariel falls in love with him at first sight. However, the Crown Prince loves the main character named Daisy, and Ariel, who has been completely blinded by jealousy, curses this girl at the cost of her life. Against all intentions, Daisy is freed from the curse and miraculously survives. In reality, the curse was broken thanks to the minor character Sirius giving his life for it. Despite the loss of 2 lives, the tragedy in the novel does not end in any way. Ariel's sincere love for Daisy began to flare up. And at the climax of this novel, the guy rebels to take Daisy away from the Crown Prince. But here a third minor character, Crandwin, dies saving Daisy from a fire that broke out in the palace. Thus the rebellion failed and Ariel died at the hands of the Crown Prince Helios. And that's how Helios met their happy ending, one in which only the main characters survived. Cernia, rereading the book from her native, closed it and thought about the fact that thanks to the established relationship between the Duke and the twins, the latter should avoid the path of villainy. Also, she was able to miraculously survive. But it's still getting harder and harder to predict how the story will unfold in the future. Suddenly the girl wondered, would it be enough? For some reason, she felt very uneasy. Most likely, the girl was worried because the beginning of the novel is just approaching and she doesn't know what will happen afterwards. Cernia has certainly done her best, but she keeps feeling that it's not enough. A few more days have passed since then. It was finally time for the once-a-month tea party with the Duke. The event, which had been proposed by a girl as many years ago, was still going on. Ariel and her brother were already 14 years old at that time, and from that very day until this day, not once had this tea party been cancelled. Duke immediately turned to Ariel and asked if she had finished learning the Chart language. The girl said, as she forked a piece of cake, that it was the language of the kingdom where the magic tower was located, and she wanted to learn the language of Rohan from the eastern continent. She finds it quite a fascinating endeavor. In fact, Ariel had gone to learn the language, for it was the homeland of Cerni's mother. The Duke, his turn to hear the answer, went back to the papers he had been studying and said he understood. Then he turned to his son. When he heard his name, he immediately became anxious and began to sweat profusely. Then the Duke, with a stern voice, said that as it was written in his papers, the boy had broken the pottery while running down the hall. So he asked that in the future, Ariel be careful in his behavior. The boy did feel a little ashamed about it, but he felt even sadder about his little sister being praised and him being scolded. But then, suddenly, the Duke said with a smile that despite all this, they were good for becoming sword experts. To become a worthy person in the Ardentane family, one must stand at the top with his great sword in his hands. The children immediately agreed with him. At the same time, the maid went into one of the bedrooms to bring in new towels and make up Cernia's bed. But as the maid walked forward, she suddenly saw a few drops of blood on the floor. The maid, as she passed farther and farther away, was very much surprised and even screamed with horror. She was all over the estate. This cry was heard even in the place where they had set up the tea party, and Cernia, hearing it, was very much surprised. The Duke, his turn, immediately jumped up and, seeing the maid coming toward him, inquired what had happened there. He was really worried. Then the maid ran up to him and apologized for interrupting their tea party. But she felt he was obliged to know one important thing immediately. Ariel immediately looked at her in surprise. They were so curious about what had happened that the maid even interrupted their tea party. But the girl did not divulge it in front of everyone and explained the situation to the Duke in his ear. The man, after listening to her, said he understood everything now, and added that she should go there, and he would be right there. His face was very stern, and he glanced at Cernia. The girl in turn did not take her eyes off him either. Then she said confidently that if it was somehow related to her, she should go too. But the man had already, on his way out the door, said she could do what she wanted, of course. Cernia wasn't going to stay away, so she went upstairs with the Duke and the maid. There were many different maids around her bedroom talking and discussing the situation. Cernia was very wary when she saw them. She also realized that they had come to her room, and she wondered even more what had happened there. And so as soon as they entered the room, you could see a disassembled pillow everywhere, some blood, feathers on the floor. But what won the girl's attention the most was the doll that lay in the middle of them all. She immediately realized that it was a cursed voodoo doll. Cernia was a little startled, but then she realized that it was definitely a special head that was quite rare. In fact, this is the only episode in which a girl named Sharnia appears. When the twins were about 10 years old, Cernia found the cursed doll in Nanny Burns' room, and of course, right on the spot, sentenced to execution the nanny who, in her opinion, had cursed the twins. Even though the culprit had been identified, the Duke still checked the backstory of the incident, and while scrutinizing the nanny's room, he suddenly found Cernia's hair, as well as a pearl earring that only the girl wore. He also found Cernia's diary in which she wrote about her envy of the twins. The culprit of the incident with the curse of the twins was, of course, not the nanny, but the girl herself, and when the Duke recognized the real culprit, he immediately accused her of it. Cernia, like anyone else, immediately started talking about how it wasn't all her. She tried to make Ariel feel sorry for her, but it was no use. The twins just stood silently and did not intend to help her in such a situation. Then the girl, out of desperation, even began to laugh out loud. She realized that she had been exposed, and it was useless to continue this play. However, this incident with the cursed doll should have happened back when the twins were 10 years old, and the girl didn't understand why everything was happening now. The Duke in turn entered the room, and coming close to this doll, began to examine it closely, then inquired of the other maids what had happened here. One of the maids replied with tears in her eyes that she had come to do the cleaning, but when she saw the bed she immediately screamed in fear. After that, the other maid continued talking, and said that after the girl discovered it, she immediately came and told her about it, and she immediately went to the Duke to deliver this information. The man in turn lifted the bloody doll to his side and, bringing it closer, suddenly felt some strange energy. Everything around him became more blue in color. Cernia watched in amazement, and had no way of knowing what the Duke was even doing. However, it soon subsided, and that large doll he had in his hand shrank and shrunk considerably. After he whispered a few lines, she exploded altogether, leaving behind only a small trail of dirt on his arm. By then, the butler had already come running to them and looked at the Duke in surprise. He turned to him and said that he had tried to breathe magic into her, and also said that it was not a curse at all. The butler looked at him in surprise and asked him what it was. Cernia, when she heard about it, was also very surprised and couldn't believe that it was really no curse at all. But then she remembered that in this world, a curse is a type of magic that is created according to a contract, and when it takes on another magical power, there is a reaction of rejection for the sake of protecting the contract. That is exactly what the principle of curses is. Then the girl suddenly remembered one very important detail that would come after this doll, and at that moment it really happened. 2 items suddenly appeared in the Duke's hand. A piece of hair from Cernia and a small pearl earring of hers. The man immediately shifted his gaze to the girl and asked, "I think that whole thing was hers." Cernia, fixing her hair, said that this color was unquestionably hers, and this earring she had lost quite a long time ago. In fact, this time the cursed doll was not found in the babysitter's room, but it was in her room, but it still had her hair and her lost pearl earring. In that case, the target of the curse that time, as well as this one, was absolutely not the twins, but specifically Cernia. The babysitter tried to curse the girl, not the twins, and even though Cernia was jealous of the twins, however, the behind-the-scenes aspect of the incident is that she was in no way cursing them, which means that the author did a special narrative trick. Two important pieces of information were very cleverly hidden between the lines. The novel provided information deliberately biased to one side. The author wanted to deceive the reader, and he succeeded perfectly. Cernia was now incredibly indignant, for she didn't understand who would do a narrative trick in a fantasy novel where people would absolutely not expect it. Then her father suddenly turned to her and asked if she had any idea who might have done it. The girl immediately thought that the perpetrator is definitely the nanny. She wants to say so, but she doesn't have any proof yet, so she can't just throw accusations around. So with a shake of her head, she said she couldn't even suspect who could have done it in the first place. The Duke in turn moved closer to her and told her that there was nothing wrong with it and advised her to stay close to the twins. The man looked very stern and said that the culprit would definitely be caught, so she shouldn't worry. After that, he turned to the butler and asked that he gather all the people from the family, from the coachman to the knights. Absolutely everyone should be present. At this moment, the maid turned to the young lady and said that she need not worry, for the Duke would surely find the culprit and punish him according to his merits. Cernia in turn smiled and told the maid named Chelsea that she was indeed fine. In fact, the girl realized that there were still two actions to be done. The first was to check the criminal's alibi and then to search for him. So the girl is going to see when on this day, and the last time she saw Nanny burn, she was going to parallel her investigation. Cernia remembered that the babysitter had come into her room, so she had time to plant the damn doll. The last time she had seen her with Ariel was in the dining room at lunchtime. The tea party with the Duke was at 3 o'clock sharp. The incident occurred shortly after the tea party began, and it turns out that between 1 o'clock and 10 minutes after the tea party in this interval was exactly implanted this terrible doll. In fact, if you think about it that way, there was no description of this red liquid in the novel. Cernia moved closer and sniffed, realizing that it gave off a faint smell of fish. And since it's the blood of a living being, it shouldn't change color over time. The girl started pacing the room, trying to figure out what to do next. And then suddenly she remembered the Duke's words about everyone gathering in one place to find the culprit. So it was the culprit who decided to return to the room, and at that moment she actually heard someone approaching the room, so she immediately hid behind the curtain. Then the nanny came into her room. Cernia, who was hiding behind the curtain, could see everything that was going on and wondered what she had come for in the first place. She realized that if she peeked out even a millimeter, she'd just spot her, and then it would be too bad. Nanny leaned closer to her bed at this point and was about to do something when suddenly the voice of the butler was heard behind her. He turned to Mrs. Byrne. The girl was immediately alert when she heard this. The man, in turn, wondered if all the servants had not been summoned, and asked what she was doing there, for the Duke had not yet released anyone. The nanny looked anxiously at the butler, and remained silent for a while. Cernia thanked the man in her mind that he had been able to show up in time to notice her. Mrs. Byrne was silent for a while longer. Then, smiling gently, she said that the young mistress might be frightened, which was why she had decided to clean up before she returned to the room. The man, for his part, wary, said that actually the Duke had ordered that nothing in this place should be touched, and the young lady was well aware of it. The nanny replied that she knew about it too, but she just wanted to cover it all up a bit with a cloth. At that moment, she threw a dark blue blanket over the scene. But then suddenly another voice was heard. He said sternly that it was Berna, and he was giving her time to surrender voluntarily. Nanny, when she heard this, immediately turned to the side and saw the Duke in front of her, who was armed. He in turn went over to the bed and removed this coverlet, saying that the liquid that stained this bed was confused with blood because of the slight fishy odor. However, it was Rayfur slime. The man took and dipped his fingers in the liquid and wiggled them a little, proving that there was no way it could be blood. The butler, when he heard this, was very surprised and asked if this was the white flower that was growing in the greenhouse. The Duke said that it is exactly like this. If you cut its stem, it will pour a clear and sticky liquid, and if you mix it with water, it becomes just the same red color. Ordinary people use it usually to dye fabric, because they have very little money, and these flowers are quite common. The Duke said upon reflection that it was difficult to identify the perpetrator on that basis alone, but still he observed and noticed one error. The man suddenly became silent and with slow steps began to walk toward the curtain behind which the girl was hiding. Cernia became wary. She wondered what mistake the Duke had noticed, and she felt very sad that she couldn't hear anything. But the second he opened that curtain, he found the girl. Then, in a stern voice, he asked her what she was doing here, for he had told her to stay near the twins. She felt a little embarrassed, but she decided to get out of the situation and told the Duke that this case was about her, so she wanted to help. The man in turn became even more stern and angry, and then wondered if she didn't trust him and his professionalism. When Cernia heard this, she was very much surprised. She didn't understand why he suddenly jumped to such conclusions, and said that there wasn't a person in the whole world who didn't trust him, for he was known to be more fearsome even than the sword itself. Then the girl suddenly realized that because she was too scared, she had said all those words without even thinking them through. So she immediately said it was all praise. She didn't mean anything bad. The Duke looked at her for a while, and afterwards said that in that case it was nothing. Cernia, who already wanted to expose the culprit, asked what the babysitter's mistake was, and when she looked at the Duke, she immediately saw that beautiful mischievous smile on his face. That was a pretty good sign. After some time of silence, he turned to her and told her that she showed a rather keen interest in magic, and often read the relevant books. Cernia still didn't understand what he was even getting at, but he said that was right, and even blushed a little because of it. And she herself thought about the fact that she had nothing else for a former fan of fantasy novels to do, since stories about magic and elves have a pretty big similarity to them. Then the Duke wanted to ask her a question. He said that magic that was invisible to the eye, but it still existed everywhere, though unevenly placed, and he wondered why it was so. Cernia remembered perfectly well why this was so, for it had been mentioned in a book about the relationship between magic and elementalism. So she easily said that, because everyone's susceptibility to magic was different. The man, hearing this, said that it was quite true, and not only humans were susceptible to magic. At that moment, he turned around and started walking back to her bed. He pointed his hand straight at the scene and said that the magic power of the Kanando was centered around that red liquid. Then he turned to Bern and said that that was exactly what her big mistake was. The girl kept brushing herself off and pretending she wasn't guilty of anything. So she said she didn't know anything about it and couldn't even see magic, so she thought it was a false accusation against her. The Duke was silent for a while. Then he said that surely she couldn't see her. That was why she was wrong to put the juice of this flower in the fruit of the Harquin. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised, but could not say anything. The butler, in turn, on hearing this, asked in surprise, "Did she really put that substance there?" Duke, for his part, said that in fact, if one Hargan is used, a poison is formed that causes headaches and a rise in body temperature. It was placed in the hope of recreating the odor of blood and poisoning Cernia with this particular poison. However, when this substance and the sap of the plant are mixed together, the result is not poison, but medicine. When Bern heard this, she was very surprised and asked what other medicine. The Duke in turn said that this medicine increases magic power. The man also added that the dosage is extremely small. However, it can enhance magical energy, so ordinary people use this drug in order to increase their effectiveness. The girl realized at that moment that the Duke knew everything from curses to poisonous and healing herbs, and she would have believed it if he had been called not a master swordsman, but a very real mage. But then suddenly the Duke looked at the girl's joyful face and told her to temper her joy a little, for she had disobeyed him after all. However, at this point, their nanny began to smile evilly and told the Duke that he had no proof that she was the one who had committed the crime after all. The man suddenly frowned, and after that straightened up and asked, "Does she really think that everything he said earlier was proof of that?" He then asked, did she really not understand why he gathered all the workers in one place? He also said that attempting to harm an aristocrat is an incredibly grave offense, and he's giving her one last chance to surrender voluntarily, or he'll have to use extreme measures. Byrne didn't answer anything. She only stood frowning and staring at him. Then the man replied that her time for surrender was coming to an end. He went to the closet and opened it, and said it was her gloves and apron, all of which were just the substance that was on the young lady's bed. He also said that she had hidden them in the closet because the maid who was cleaning the room had come in earlier than she had generally expected. Byrne at this point began to panic very much, for she realized that her identity was being revealed. Then she began to scream, saying that she didn't know anything about it. They had recently been stolen from her and then slipped into her closet to frame her. The Duke looked at her in surprise and asked, "Does he still really think she was meant to be framed?" And wondered, is this really her last word in her defense? Cernia looked at the maid at this point and realized that there was in fact another proof. They all stood silent for a while longer. Then Berna fell to the ground trembling and asked why it was so. She cried bitterly and said she had done everything Mike had told her to do, but it hadn't worked out. The Duke in turn spontaneously said that the curse required payment, and since she had given nothing in return, the curse would certainly not work. The woman suddenly cried out and said that that magician had told her that the liquid and the doll would be the payment. Then the Duke replied that she should be grateful to the mage who had taught her this delusion. After all, if she had paid the price for this curse, her fortune would be no different from this doll. Byrne wept bitterly, but at that moment a man came up to her and drew his weapon to repay her for this attempt. Cernia immediately ran forward, and not realizing if he really wanted to slit her throat, then she asked the Duke to stop. The man looked at her in surprise and asked why she was suddenly in his way. The girl asked him to let her start her own punishment. The Duke in turn said that subjecting a nobleman to a curse was a pretty serious offense, but the girl objected and said that it was only an attempt, and the true action she had failed to complete. She turned to Nanny and said she wanted to hear the reason before he carried out the punishment. The maid's hands trembled. Then she said that if it hadn't been for Cernia, it might have been her daughter. The girl, when she heard this, was very much surprised. She certainly knew that the nanny was a viscountess, but she had no idea that it was so serious. For some time they were silent. Then Cernia said that she had never seen a woman leave to see her daughter. The nanny explained that she was just sick, and it wasn't easy for her to pay for expensive medication. The Duchess talked about bringing her to this place and the fact that the girl might even grow up. The Duke turned her down, saying she couldn't take care of 4 children on her own, and if there was no Cernia, she could raise her daughter in the Duke's cottage. When the girl heard this, she was very much surprised. After all, her reasons were not grandiose. However, she understood perfectly well that the nanny was just thinking about her child. That's why she blamed Cernia for it all the time. But Cernia must have known this, for she was far more observant than the girl who was now the character. She guessed at the nanny's hard-to-see other intent, so the girl could find her room beforehand. Then she discovered the cursed doll before the curses appeared, and that's how the incident in the original story happened. For some time Cernia was silent, but then, turning to Mrs. Byrne, asked that she get up. The girl thought of the fact that back then everyone just wanted blame, and so no one was sorting out the details. Because Cernia was jealous of the twins in the affair, she was blamed after the nanny. The woman herself blamed her for everything. She turned to Mrs. Byrne and said in a sad voice that the nanny had been fired. In fact, neither the twins nor Cernia had done anything wrong to anyone. It was just the way the circumstances were. The girl said that they would keep silent about what happened that day. However, she's forbidden to work in aristocratic families from now on. She must return to the path of realization and not appear in social circles either. Instead, she should stay close to her beloved daughter and take care of her for the rest of her life. Cernia has decided to finally end the curse that causes absolutely everyone suffering. When Byrne heard this, she cried even more. She apologized to the young mistress, even feeling incredibly ashamed of what she had done to her in the first place. Cernia, for her part, remained very satisfied. She thought about the fact that no one had been hurt in the end, and she had even learned an important truth about that part of the story. Since there was a narrative trick here, she decided she shouldn't trust this novel plot entirely. Things could change, and what's more, She's already changing the story, so things aren't going the way they did in the original. Soon the maids came to clean all these stains and to eradicate the horrible smell of fish. The Duke said that this room would be closed to the public from now on. The girl, when she heard this, looked at him in surprise and asked why that was so. The man explained that she was at the end of the hallway after all, and it was too far away, so he wanted to move her long ago anyway. Cernia, when she heard this, was at once delighted, and requested that the Duke would in that case put her in the room next door to the twins. The man smiled and told her to tell the Dane what kind of furniture she wanted for her room. She replied that the one she had now would suffice. The man was a little surprised, and then he said that he had offered to buy a new one, so he asked her to tell the butler which one she wanted. Cernia felt a little awkward about it, and said that she understood now, and would be sure to give the butler her wishes. Then she decided to change the subject of conversation, and wondered if he had any more evidence that Mrs. Byrne was a criminal. Duke in turn said that what was used for curses was a medicine that increases magical power. And since it had effects, even if it was just smeared on, he saw the magical power that was increasing around Byrne. Cernia, when she heard this, was very surprised, and said that he must have guessed everything at first sight. And that was just amazing in her opinion. That was how the very incident with the cursed doll ended, and it had been a full winter in the duchy. Winter passed, during which there were many adventures, and so came a beautiful blossoming spring. Unlike the original Cernia, who ended her life while still 12 years old, the girl was able to live to her now 17th birthday, and she was insanely happy to be a survivor. But she was also worried about the upcoming events of the novel, which were approaching at breakneck speed. The Crown Prince's birthday ball was soon to begin, and at this ball, Ariel would fall in love with Crown Prince Helios at first sight. And after that she becomes the villain of the novel. That nice and sweet girl turns into just a cruel and emotionless character. Cernia was very upset by this, and didn't know how she could keep her from falling in love with him so she wouldn't turn into a mean girl. And as the day drew near, she kept telling Ariel all sorts of nasty things about him. For example, one day she said that she had heard that the Crown Prince was always swearing inappropriately. Ariel then looked at her in surprise and said that if she didn't like the Crown Prince, she would dislike him too. Despite all these words, the girl was still rather anxious. She was strolling through the garden. Suddenly, as she passed the gazebo, she heard some shouting. They belonged to the twins. Ariel turned to her and asked why she was so late. Ariel said they wanted to play with her as soon as possible, so they worked hard in class. They both ran up to the girl and asked her to praise them. They were both 15 years old at that time, but they were still naive and sweet children. Cernia patted them on the head and told them they were doing well. She was surprised that at their age they still wanted such simple praise. Then spoke Ariella, asking that the girl not marry and live with her all her life. Ariel also intervened in the conversation. He took the girl's hand and said that not at all, she would live with him, and Ariel must go. Cernia was surprised at this behavior and said that they could live the three of them right as they were. There was no need to separate. Ariel sighed heavily and said that she didn't want to live her whole life next to her brother. But since she was saying that after all, she figured she could be patient, I guess. Ariel looked angrily at his sister and said that he didn't actually like her either, and if Cernia was the one, he wouldn't want to spend a second of his time around her. They started arguing again. Then the girl asked them to stop, because they should cherish their family, with whom they shared blood, and appreciate each other, and not fight all the time. Cernia, smiling, also said that they were, you see, irreplaceable brother and sister to each other. There would never be such a thing anywhere else, so they should love and respect each other's decision. When Ariel and her brother heard this, they immediately stopped their arguments. They were very touched and pleased by these words. The girl turned to her and told her that she was her family too. Cernia is the most important person in the world to her. Ariel agreed with his sister and said that besides, they were also a family they shared blood with, so there was nothing wrong with that. The girl was dumbfounded at this moment, for it was not really with this intention that she had uttered these words. They were actually worried about her, a girl who had lost her parents early and was all alone, so she was incredibly precious to these two people. Cernia stepped closer to them and, taking the twins' hands in hers, said that she actually thought they were the most precious people in her life too, and she just didn't know what she would do if they weren't present. They hugged, and then the girl suggested that they go to the gazebo and sit to discuss everything that had happened during the day. The three of them drank tea and ate goodies and talked about everything. Many of them laughed, others just talked passionately among themselves. Then the talk was about the ball, and Ariel excitedly said that she wanted to go to this ball in paired dresses with Cernia. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised, and then said that she would love to do it, but unfortunately would not go there. When Ariel heard this, she was very surprised, and asked why she didn't want to go to this ball with them. In fact, in the novel, Cernia just physically couldn't go to the Crown Prince's ball because she was dead, but she can't say so unconditionally. So the girl thought about what to say to them. She began to cough suddenly, and said that it was because she had a cold, so they could go and have fun together while she was being treated. Ariel, when he heard this, was very indignant, and asked how he could have fun when she was sick, and since Cernia wasn't going anywhere, he wouldn't go either out of solidarity. Ariel also said she's not going anywhere because she can't leave her alone when she's sick. But at that moment the Duke came into the gazebo and protested, saying that not at all, everyone would go to the ball. Cernia immediately started to get up from the table, saying that she thought she had a serious cold. Ariel stopped her and told her that she was sick and should not overwork herself. Then the Duke sighed heavily and said that in that case, he would call a priest. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised and did not understand why she should call a priest and not a doctor. Cernia assumed that he somehow wanted to cure her cold by divine intervention, but she only smiled in response and said that not at all. She would feel better after she just rested. She herself hoped he wouldn't call any priest, because that would be too awkward. The Duke was a little surprised and said that since she just needed to rest, she might as well go to the ball afterward. He didn't see any problem with that. Cernia, head down, thought about the fact that there was nothing she could do. She had one last excuse left in her head, and if it didn't work, it would be a complete failure. In fact, special invitations are usually sent to major events like the Crown Prince's birthday party, and they couldn't be given to all people, even if they were from the same family. Luckily, she wasn't the one to receive an invitation to the ball, so the girl sighed heavily, looking sad, and said that she hadn't received an invitation from the imperial palace. When the whole family heard this, they were very indignant, especially the Duke. They did not understand how this could have happened. Then Ariel became very serious and said she didn't need to go to an event like this in such a case. Ariel started yelling, saying that these people just didn't realize her worth, but she shouldn't worry. Ariel didn't understand how they dared not send an invitation for her since she is a member of their family. Cernia was surprised at the twins' behavior. They showed no respect for the imperial family and their decision, but in reality she just didn't want to go and tried to get out of it as best she could. So now, more than ever, the girl hoped for the Duke's support. He, in turn, stretched his hand forward and said that it did not matter at all. No one could prevent the family, so she could still go. The girl was a little upset by this, but then realized that she had to go anyway too, and she had no choice as such. The next day the maids were picking out the girl's outfit for the ball. When they brought her a beautiful, lush white dress, they said that it suited her incredibly well. Cernia, who was standing in it, felt a little uncomfortable. It looked more like a wedding dress than a ball gown. But suddenly one of the maids said that the Duke had prepared this dress for her. When the girl heard this, she asked in surprise if it was really true, for she had never thought that he could have done it. She imagined the Duke standing among all those beautiful and lavish clothes and choosing this dress especially for her. So she didn't believe it, of course, and asked the maid if she was joking. But the maid replied that actually the Duke had personally chosen this dress, so it was definitely not a joke. Cernia was very surprised to hear this, but then she was even pleased, and thought about how she would have to be sure to thank him for it later. Then all of a sudden the twins knocked on their door and asked if she was ready yet, and if they could come in. When the girl heard their voices, she immediately got excited and said that of course they could come in. She was already in that dress. And as soon as the children ran into the room, Ariel looked at the girl with admiration and said that she was just incredibly beautiful. Ariel was at a loss for speech for a while, but then he resented it and told his sister that she was actually beautiful every day. Ariel was a little surprised at his aggressiveness and said that he was right, of course. But this was the first time she had seen Cernia so beautifully dressed up. They ran up close to her, and taking her hands, Ariel said that she would definitely outshine all the girls in the ballroom that day. Cernia thanked her for the compliments, saying that they actually shone brightly too. Ariel laughed and said that she was very worried about whether she would like her, but the girl in turn said that she was never ugly. Ariel also intervened in the conversation and asked what about him, if she liked his outfit. She smiled and said that of course he was very beautiful too. The twins were pleased that she had praised them, so everyone was happy. At that moment, a butler came into their room and greeted everyone, saying that the carriage was ready and they could depart. In order to avoid the death that was destined for Cernia in the novel, she lived without ceasing to feel anxious. Wished that Ariel did not live the life that was plotted by the novel. She sincerely loved them and treasured these two very much. However, she was still very worried that she might not have influenced them, and their fate would not change. And the fact that she, being this heroine, is still alive, is not an interference in their future. Because of this, the girl was constantly anxious and did not know what would happen next. Because of such worries, she still hadn't taken a step out of the Duke's house and was near the twins all the time. So this day was the first time she stepped out into the light of society. As soon as they entered the hall, the party organizer immediately said that their family had arrived, and separately introduced the young lady Cernia. The guests, when they saw her, immediately began to look at her without taking their eyes off her and kept saying something behind her back. The girl, more than anyone else, perfectly felt the heaviness of their gazes. But at that moment, she heard the voice of the Duke, with whom her friend was walking. He tapped her arm in consolation and told her to straighten up on her back, for she had nothing to fear here. Cernia was actually incredibly worried and wasn't sure if her trembling would ever go away. But then, in order to reassure at least the Duke, she smiled and said that it would definitely be safe around him, so she wouldn't be so worried. He was about to ask something, but then suddenly, the party organizer announced that His Majesty's Emperor and Crown Prince of the Honor Empire and descendant of the Sun had arrived. He turned the attention of all the people present towards the entrance and told them to meet His Majesty the Emperor. Everyone immediately began to bow in respect to him. The Emperor in turn, when he came out with his son, said that they might raise their heads. The man also said that he was incredibly grateful to all of them for coming together on this day for the sake of celebrating the Crown Prince's birthday. Cernia, when she heard that, she was wary and thought about the fact that he spoke out directly like a real headmaster. And looking at the guy who was standing next to her, she realized that this was most likely the same Crown Prince of the Empire. He had silver hair and golden eyes shining brighter than diamonds. He was the handsome man described in the novel. Only now he was even more pleasant to look at in person. For a while longer the Emperor said something, and afterward he said that he hoped everyone would enjoy this fine ball and have a good time. At that moment, Cernia, who had been scrutinizing the Crown Prince all this time, suddenly noticed that their gazes had crossed. But at that moment Ariel came up to her and immediately interrupted her, startling her out of these thoughts. The girl was so focused on the Crown Prince that she was even startled when she heard her voice. But Ariel, in turn, was outraged and said that she was hiding behind her father, and the Crown Prince didn't have a bride yet, so he was looking for a dance partner. The girl replied in a whisper that there were a lot of beautiful girls in the room, and he hadn't asked her to dance with him. She also told Ariel that she was even more worried about her, because she was really incredibly beautiful. But at that moment, Ariel came up to them and turned to her and asked if she would dance with him. Ariel, hearing this, became very indignant, and striking her brother on the arm, said not at all, for she would be the first to dance with her. The guy, hearing this, was very surprised and asked if she was really going to dance with the girl now. Cernia, in her turn, tried to quiet these two, because there were a lot of people in the hall, and they started shouting loudly. Ariel stood up for herself and said she was fine with it, and even if she couldn't dance with the girl, she didn't care. She wasn't going to listen to him. Then suddenly, the Duke, who was standing next to them, heard the Crown Prince talking to some girl nearby, and said that he had already chosen a partner for the dance. Cernia, when she heard this, was very surprised. He in turn looked at them and asked the girl if she wanted to dance with him, but she answered him at once that she did not wish to do so. Then the Duke asked her with whom she was going to dance at all. The girl looked around, thought about the fact that her choice was not difficult at all. So smiling, she pointed towards the Duke, took his hand, and said that of course she wanted to dance with him. She said she had to choose the most powerful man in the family for the first dance. Soon they began to dance, and the man said he could only look at her so that he wouldn't notice the people around him and she wouldn't get dizzy. Cernia was a little surprised at this. She said she would do it. They continued to dance. The man was quite fun and engaging. Everyone around them was dancing too, and enjoying this beautiful moment. They were silent for a while. Then the Duke suddenly turned to her and asked how long she was going to call him Duke. Cernia, when she heard this, was a little surprised. It was actually the first time he had been able to show his feelings so openly. He looked alarmed and wished he knew the answer. The girl was silent for a while. Then she asked him what he thought she should call him. The Duke had known for a long time and said that she could call him uncle, and that would be more correct in his opinion. Cernia smiled and called him that, and they continued to twirl in the dance. But then she accidentally stepped on his foot and apologized. All this time she had been calling him uncle, and when the Duke heard it, he happily began to smile. He really liked that she was starting to call him that. It made him feel more important and closer. But soon the tune finally ended. They bowed to each other, thanking each other for their couple's dance, and the girl was very happy that they would finally stop dancing. She took him under her arm and they walked back into the crowd. Cernia was talking casually to the Duke about something and realized that apparently he was in a very good mood now. It really mattered to him that she called him uncle, not just Duke like everyone else. Ariel ran up to her after a while and took her hand and told her that she had won one game, and so the next dance would be with her. Cernia smiled and asked if she and her brother had finally solved the silly argument with a game. The girl said it was like that, and she even won the very first time. When they started to get ready to dance, they had another problem. They didn't know who would lead. Ariel was silent for a while, then suddenly giggled and got into a special pose with his arm around her waist like men usually did. Cernia said that apparently the future flower of high society would lead the way. Then the melody began to play, and they all began to dance. Ariel asked the girl if she had stopped being nervous. Cernia, in turn, wondered if she'd really seen her step on the Duke's foot because she was nervous. The girl replied that she stepped on her foot because she was nervous, and honestly, she expected quite that because it was normal. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised, and said that, in that case, she should have stopped her. Ariel replied that she had tried, for she had offered to do the first dance with her, but she had chosen her father in the end. Cernia, hearing this funny story, laughed. Ariel frowned at first, but then smiled and said that if the girl hadn't gone to this ball, she would have surely died of boredom in this place. Then the girl suggested that they take advantage of this great opportunity and make as many friends as possible. They looked around at those ladies who were alone and decided to skip the dancing for some reason and just stood and discussed some social news. Ariel looked around, indignant, and said that she really only needed her and no one else would replace her. Cernia suddenly became very serious, turning to the girl and saying that she wished she and her brother could see a much bigger world together and meet many wonderful people who would inspire and guide them. Ariel suddenly blushed all red. She felt very embarrassed and said that she would like to stay as long as possible with her. She didn't need other people. She didn't need to see the world. She only wanted to be near Cernia. Then their foreheads touched, and the girl said that surely she could always come back to her, for she would forever stay in this place and support them. She also said it was a promise. Soon the music ended and Ariel was the first to run up to them. He told the girl that now she had to dance with him. Syrian sighed heavily and began to wipe the sweat from her face, and said that she just couldn't take another third tune in a row this way. She needed some rest. But at that moment another man suddenly approached them. He turned to one of the girls and said that she was the treasure that was hidden in the Duke's house, most likely to Syrian. This man was Helios Aslan. He was 15 years old and was the first prince of the empire. Everyone bowed at once, The girl stepped forward and greeted the honor of the empire and the descendant of the sun, the crown prince. The man in his turn turned to Ariel and asked if it was true that he was the young master and the next head of the Ardentine family. When the guy nodded, he said he was very happy to finally meet him. Then he looked at Ariel and asked if it was true that she was his younger twin sister. The girl confirmed this information as well as her brother. However, their faces were very dissatisfied. The crown prince smiled in his turn and reached forward and asked the young lady Cernia if she would give him her dance by chance. The girl at this moment thought about the fact that Helios actually lives a rather boring life in the imperial palace. Because of that, he probably enjoys interesting events like this. The girl had no time to say anything to him, but then Ariel suddenly spoke up and apologizing said that she was going to give him this dance first thing. Helios was a little surprised at this behavior and said that he wasn't actually asking the young gentleman, but specifically Cernia. But the girl in turn replied that he was actually right. He was asking for forgiveness, but she had made that promise a week ago. So, bowing, she asked that the crown prince be magnanimous and forgive them for this.